Big news in college football tonight. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish have a new head coach, and it is a former Ohio State Buckeye, Marcus Freeman, their 35-year-old defensive coordinator, staying on staff. And he is reportedly going to be the next head coach, not confirmed by the school, but several sources indicate that this move is going to happen. And also that Tommy Rees, the offensive coordinator, which has been confirmed by the school, Tommy Rees is staying at Notre Dame. But specifically as it relates to Marcus Freeman, what kind of impact does this have on the Ohio State Buckeyes, who certainly need to address the defense here this offseason? All that coming up next here, Buckeye Breakdown.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.
Well, happy Wednesday evening, everybody. Alongside Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. This is a spur-of-the-moment breaking news edition of Buckeye Breakdown. The Notre Dame Fighting Irish, certainly one of the premier powers in college athletics. They have reportedly tabbed their next head coach, Marcus Freeman, former Ohio State linebacker and current defensive coordinator. Brett, I think when we talked the other day about possible options and candidates, it felt like this search probably didn't need to go particularly far. If you check out Irish Breakdown, which is the Notre Dame fan site, they do an awesome job covering Notre Dame in our Sports Illustrated Fan Nation network. Brian Driscoll at Notre Dame said that he had several sources tell him that Marcus Freeman turned down $3 million a year to go be the defensive coordinator with Brian Kelly down at LSU. Tommy Rees also turned down Brian Kelly, as did a couple of other staff members. Brian Kelly tried to buy the Notre Dame staff, and they are not leaving the South Bend, so he's got to figure it out. Also, reportedly, Tony Alford, Ohio State's running backs coach, was courted by Brian Kelly, and Tony is staying in Columbus. So LSU staff needs to come from elsewhere, and there is a former Buckeye that will be in the horseshoe week 1 next year with Marcus Freeman leading the charge for Notre Dame. What do you think?
I think it's a really smart move from the Notre Dame perspective. I think it's a credit to Marcus for essentially kind of betting on himself and turning down absurd money for a coordinator job, to go to LSU. I mean, that $3 million a year is more than what some Power 5 blue blood college basketball head coaches make. So that's crazy good money, and quite frankly absurd for any type of assistant. But it's a smart move on their part. I think Notre Dame needed to win in a big way with whoever was going to be the new guy in charge. And in my mind, there really wasn't a person out there in college football that they could have got that I really felt like was both a win, quote unquote, on and off the field outside of Marcus. I thought Marcus was kind of the only guy who checked both of those boxes in a really dynamic way. The last time we talked about this, a lot of people were mentioning Urban Meyer as a potential candidate for that job. And I think Urban maybe checks the on-field stuff, but the off-field is an absolute PR nightmare. And so, this is a good example of kind of weighing both of those, kind of sides of the conversation. And I think, Notre Dame comes out looking really, really good when you look at it through kind of both of those lenses.
I was also told that Luke Fickell had a conversation with athletic director Jack Swarbrick. It didn't go much further than that. I think I was not told this, but my thought process is that Luke Fickell probably didn't want to do to his team what Brian Kelly did to the Irish. I think Luke is trying to be fair and loyal to Cincinnati during a time where they have a very realistic chance of making the college football playoff if they win this weekend. And it's just my guess that he didn't want that distraction for his team. I also think Luke probably wouldn't have taken this job unless it was after the Bearcats season was over, or if they get knocked out of the college football playoff, and Notre Dame would have been willing to wait for a bit longer. I've also learned that Jack Swarbrick, when he hired Marcus Freeman last year, part of the thought process there was, look, this is a guy that has head coach potential. He's 35. He's never been a head coach. And it sounds like his interview, Marcus wasn't shying away from that they are developing a plan to make sure that he can be well enough supported. But that the things that he could control, that he kind of blew away Jack Swarbrick and several of the other decision makers with Notre Dame. So, look, it's if you're a Buckeye fan watching this, you're probably a bit bummed, thinking that maybe, Marcus could have been a potential option at Ohio State. I should, I guess, circle back here. There's no current job opening at Ohio State. Larry Johnson, Al Washington, Kerry Combs, Matt Barnes are all on staff. It sounds like Ryan Day may meet with the media at some point over the next few days. That hasn't been confirmed yet, but it is likely. And I'm sure there are going to be questions asked of Ryan Day on what his thoughts are around the problems defensively in a couple of the team's biggest games. This is also a really, really important time in recruiting. Tonight's a huge night in recruiting. Ohio State lands a quarterback commit for the class of 22 after Quinn Ewers had reclassified. The Buckeyes needed to get a quarterback, and they land Devin Brown out of Utah. If you look at the top 15 quarterback prospects in the country in the 20, 21, and 22 cycles, the last 3 years, Ohio State has 4 of the 15 on their roster. Quinn Ewers, Kyle McCord, CJ Stroud, and then now with the incoming Devin Brown. They are certainly racking up high-level talent in that room. Jack Miller's already obviously entered the transfer portal, and he won't be in Columbus for much longer if he's still there at all at this point. So, look, there are a lot of things going on right now as the Buckeyes are trying to address the challenges that they faced. And the reality is whatever bowl game they're going to get in, Brett, is fine, and it's a good opportunity to go out and get better. But their national championship aspirations need to start right now. Frankly, it needed to start when the team left the Big House on Saturday, and everything they do leading up to the start of next season needs to be about figuring out how to be right there next year and in the college football playoff with a very difficult schedule, especially at home. They've got Notre Dame, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Michigan all coming to Columbus next year. So again, it's not like there is currently an opening. Nobody's been let go in Columbus, but I think there's been a lot of speculation on who could do a better job defensively. How could things be restructured? I am under the impression that Marcus Freeman was never really an option for Ohio State. It sounds like he and Ryan Day had a conversation last year, and it just never materialized. And the reality is Marcus Freeman, if he wasn't the new head coach at Notre Dame, sounded like he was probably going to be pretty highly courted by Duke. And if Luke Fickell went to Notre Dame from Cincinnati, I guarantee you Marcus Freeman would have been high on the priority list for the Bearcats as well. So just that never really felt like it was going to be a reality in Columbus.
Isn't it kind of amazing like the domino effect of who goes where and how that might affect, another coach and where that guy goes? I think that's just kind of the shifting, landscape that we have right now, both with, coaching in college football, but also, players in the transfer portal and all of that. But, I would have been, quite frankly, flabbergasted if Ohio State would have been able to bring Marcus Freeman in, as like a defensive coordinator / like associate head coach type role. That would have been one of the great coups of the college football season, insofar as, getting help where you needed it most. I think it also speaks a little bit to, his hire at Notre Dame. And, we saw the comment there for Robert. I think it kind of speaks a little bit to how much college football has changed as much as, or in the context of coaching experience, right? And Ryan Day is perhaps maybe the best example of that, right? Where, ultra hot coordinator comes in and shows both a willingness to recruit and then a proven track record of turning those recruits into NFL, prospects, and then basically turns that Q rating into a top 3 college football job, with no real tangible head coaching experience, right? Marcus Freeman does the exact same thing. Now, obviously, Notre Dame's not at the level of Ohio State in as much as a high quality college football job, but it's not that far away either. And so, it's kind of amazing how all of that has changed when, 5-10 years ago, Marcus Freeman would have had to have gone to a MAC school or a below average, ACC school and done really, really well and overachieved in a big way at those programs just to even sniff an opportunity at a Notre Dame or a school like that. So, the game has changed. It's in a massive, massive way. I would expect this to continue, this trend of, going straight from a coordinator job to a high profile head coaching job. I would expect that to keep going and not really slow down anytime soon. It's a great move for him. And, certainly he deserves all the credit in the world, because this is a guy who, had a really tremendous college career at Ohio State, didn't totally make it work at the next level, but put that same work ethic into coaching, and goodness gracious, it's paying off. That bank account going to look real good real soon, and it's paying off in a huge way.
I am, admittedly, I'm a little bit of, a little bit intrigued by the fact that I have not heard Joe Moorehead's name floated around at all publicly with the Notre Dame job, and yet it sounds like he is probably the guy that Akron is zeroing in on. And I don't really understand that. I think Joe Moorehead got a super raw deal when he was at Mississippi State. He's been an awesome offensive coordinator, truly one of the best offensive coordinators in the country. And I guess I would have thought that someone as high profile as him probably would have gotten some consideration for a job like Notre Dame. And I'm a bit surprised that, that he may go from being the OC at Oregon to running the school's program at Akron. It feels like a strange move. I don't know if it was ever realistic for him to get a job at a place like Notre Dame. But there's a lot of reasons to me why that could have made some sense.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said before here multiple times of how big of a fan I am of Joe Moorehead, and that's just not due to the fact that I know the guy. I think his track record, when he took Trace McSorley, to unbelievable heights, and Saquon Barkley, into a first round, pick, and made Penn State's offense. Mike Gesicki is another one. Penn State, Chris Godwin, like goodness gracious, he took kids who maybe we didn't necessarily expect a ton out of coming out of high school, and almost all of them are playing, in the NFL right now. And you can draw a straight line from that to Joe Moorehead. And you're absolutely right, man. The leash was like kind of ridiculously and like almost like questionably short at Mississippi State, and that, him basically not getting any time whatsoever to figure that out was borderline criminal in a lot of ways. But then you flip that around and you look at what he's done in Oregon in the first, couple months of the season. That was a really dynamic offense, and you can't really argue with the results, especially early on. And then, without some injuries happening to that team on that side of the football, they're probably, even now, I think that game against Utah, which they got blown out a couple of weeks ago, I think that game's a heck of a lot closer than it is. So, yeah, I'm a little surprised that he wasn't maybe more in the conversation. I do think sometimes when you have a strong internal candidate like you had at Notre Dame with Marcus, that maybe the ball is able to get rolling a lot faster, and so. And also I think, the consultants and headhunting agencies that these universities use for, coaching searches, it can take them, 48 hours, 72 hours to really get their kind of wheels spinning and get everything up off the ground. And when you have such a strong guy sitting in a room over, that doesn't necessarily need to happen. So maybe some of the research and stuff that would have probably been done, the due diligence, if you will, that would have been done on a guy like Joe Moorehead, where I think he elevates in a big way towards the top of the list. I don't think that just happened. And then also, I think, some of his health concerns, he had to step away for, the better part of a month from Oregon because of some health stuff this year. I think that also factors in a little bit to the decision. But yeah, Akron's a curious move for me in a big way for him specifically. And then no disrespect to Akron, but I kind of feel like he could maybe have done a touch better than that.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I mean, they've got a long, long way to go, and he's proven he can coach really well at a high level. And I'm just surprised to see that move for him.
Yeah, and I also think and maybe it's one of those situations where he was just ready to be a head coach, ASAP, right? So I know which comment you're going to put up. I just saw it a second ago.
This Ohio State sweatshirt has nothing to do with people thinking that I'm not a true Buckeye fan. That's hilarious. This has everything to do with I'm not home at the moment, and this happens to be what I was wearing today. So yes, if that helps for everybody that thinks that I'm not a Buckeye, I think that was ridiculous the other night.
That's really funny.
Whatever, but it is funny and it was ironic. So there you go.
Yeah, if for some context, if you paid attention to the postmortem that we did after the Michigan game, Brendan caught some strays in the comment section for wearing blue. In a short amount of time after that game. Now, I'm not going to say you necessarily deserve to catch strays for wearing blue. I mean, that's personal choice, and I'm wearing it now, no problem. But the with all of your Ohio State stuff in your traditional background that you see in your home, apparently that was conveniently overlooked by those folks. But so shout out to Linz for continuing the joke that we will laugh about for a good long time. I kind of think Joe's just ready to be a head coach again, right? And whatever job he could get, that was going to be a priority. It's also, you have to remember, Pittsburgh native, grew up in the Whippeal, knows Western Pennsylvania extremely well. That's a hotbed of talent. And Akron's not super far from Pittsburgh, right? That's pretty close to home for him. So I think that's certainly appealing for him. But man, Akron's a really tough sell recruiting wise in so many ways. And it would be great to see someone kind of resurrect that program a little bit to make it significantly more competitive than it is at the moment. And in my mind, if he is the guy that officially signs on, it's only a matter of time before you see, Akron start competing for MAC titles.
Let's turn the conversation here back to Freeman for a second. Again, I have been under the impression that Marcus Freeman to Ohio State as a defensive coordinator type role isn't really something that was even on the table. So this is more theoretical, but as a Buckeye, seeing what he did at Cincinnati and then taking it to Notre Dame and taking a team that, I mean, my God, the first 2 weeks, they were atrocious. And it was mostly the offensive line that was really bad. They should have lost their opener, and then they darn near lost to Toledo in week 2. And I am certainly willing to admit that, I am stunned at their turnaround. Now, they've certainly had some, a few other close wins, but they have absolutely played much better football the last 3 or 4 weeks. And Notre Dame has suddenly put themselves, right in the hunt for a college football playoff spot if they can have a couple things fall their way this coming weekend. All that said, how disappointed should Buckeye fans be that Marcus Freeman to Ohio State in any capacity wasn't really an option, and now very obviously is not an option? He's going to be the head coach at one of Ohio State's top national rivals in some regard.
We're talking about Ohio State fans and realistic expectations here, right?
I think that was unfortunately the words I used.
Yeah, I think like I said a minute ago, I would have been literally like flabbergasted if they were able to bring him. Not to mention the fact that I think I could make the argument that if you're paying $3 million for a defensive coordinator, you're probably overpaying. But and that's just the fact, right? It's more of, in my mind, I think Ohio State's a lot closer on defense than I think maybe we realize. And I think there are some specific scheme changes that they can do to help mitigate some of the consistent problems that we saw. But on top of all of that, another year of experience goes a long way, especially for the backers of Ohio State, linebackers, for sure. I think another year of experiencing speed to understand gap contain run fits will pay dividends for that group. And I think some of the problems that you saw kind of at that second level with tackling and certainly against Michigan just being bullied, I think those go away. It's also another year for a really young, in my mind, a pretty young defensive line group to be able to get a little bit more dynamic, especially on the interior. So they had to replace obviously some guys, but I think in general, all of that gets incrementally better, a percentage or two better. And then maybe some of those little schematic things can really trend, Ohio State into a better place, because I really don't think they're that far away. And on top of that, I'm not entirely sure there's a guy out there who is like a DB coach or a linebacker coach or a DC at, a non-Power 5 program that moonwalks into Columbus and all of a sudden turns them into 2021 Georgia. I don't think Ohio State has the personnel for that, but I also don't think necessarily that guy exists. So I think you kind of have to focus a little bit on yourself and then maybe have some conversations elsewhere. But I'm not entirely sure there's that guy out there.
Ohio State last year, obviously had defensive issues in the end of the season, right? I mean, even with a fairly convincing win over Clemson, I mean, Trevor Lawrence still threw for 400 yards against the Buckeyes. Michael Penix threw for 400 yards against Ohio State when Indiana had a good run last year, and obviously Alabama torched the Buckeyes. And I think it made Ryan Day make some adjustments. You just kind of think back to how the staff changes shifted a little bit. Greg Madison, retires. Kerry Combs becomes the defensive coordinator with the thought that was going to be better than him just focusing on the secondary and being a co-coordinator. Matt Barnes and Parker Fleming got elevated to more prominent roles. And there were analysts brought on, Paul Rhodes and Todd Fitch. And so it's not like Ryan Day did nothing. I don't think that's the case at all. And you can make an argument that for a good chunk of the season, the Buckeyes certainly seem to be taking good steps. Maybe we're a little prisoner of the moment because the defensive effort against Michigan was so poor. Maybe Michigan's offensive line is really that physical and that tough. Maybe their offensive line is that good, and the Buckeyes are young and weren't quite ready for that yet. But I don't want to take away the growth areas that Ohio State had defensively throughout the course of the year, because especially the 2 weeks before the Michigan game, the Buckeye defense looked pretty darn good against Purdue and against Michigan State. It's not like they were a full-blown liability, but they had two really bad games, and they lost them both. And obviously that cost the national championship, and Big Ten championship aspirations. So I think there's been progress there. And I don't really know if it's a definite necessary got to make a staff change. I'm inclined to believe that would help, because I think the scheme might need to be different. Again, I'm not. It's not fair for me to question play calling. Okay, that's not my forte. I don't get paid to call plays. I don't like questioning people in that regard. But I didn't understand, and I would like to learn a little bit more why the Buckeyes were in nickel on 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 3, in certain instances against Michigan, when you had a feeling like, hey, look, this team has run the ball all game long. Why are there only 6 guys in the box? That didn't seem like a good formula. And is changing a coordinator, similar to what Jim Harbaugh did, bringing in Mike McDonald. They've got a more of an NFL style defense. They were way more physical this year. Is that the solution? And is changing a coordinator the only way to accomplish something like that? Those are the questions Ryan Day's got to answer.
Yeah, and that I think what you're kind of speaking to a little bit is kind of what I'm more interested in. I think in Ohio State's offense, which is essentially a evaluation of defensive philosophy. One, and if you were with us from a couple nights ago, the way I kind of summed that up was kind of embracing, the traditional role of like the silver bullets, right? And so, because I kind of think Ohio State has gotten away from that a little bit over the last handful of years, and I understand, why and how all of that kind of works, given just the offensive game. But I do think you have to kind of wonder, essentially, like, why do you do what you do? And I think personnel determines that a little bit. And the comments about, essentially a weak box versus a strong box, I think are kind of a good example of what I'm talking about as far as philosophical, base level, foundational level defense, right? If you feel like you have 2 good linebackers but not 3, you're probably not putting the 3rd out there. You know what I'm saying? So, or if you feel like your 5th DB is better than your 3rd linebacker, that DB is getting on the field. Now, I don't know if just specific with Michigan, I just given how, Michigan can have 10 guys inside the hash mark sometimes. I don't necessarily see nickel as a good way of defending that on just kind of a basic level, but no one from Ohio State is doing that like without seeing something on film, and influencing them to make that decision. So, I think there's obviously reasons for that, and we will never have the answers to those questions. But yeah, I'm very, very eager for essentially Ryan Day's next press conference in how he kind of addresses essentially the next steps that he takes on a macro, broad, spectrum, big picture when it comes to addressing some of the deficiencies that are on that side of the football. Because I'm a big believer in the phrase, one, not be a master chef to know when the soup is bad, right? So essentially what that is, right, is like, you don't have to be, this guy who's talking about 3 and 4 technique and inside leverage and all of that, breaking down a game like Drew Brees does on Sunday Night Football, to be able to watch defense when it is bad and say it is bad. And I think at times in specific spots this year, Ohio State was certainly lacking. And I think that's something that even the most novice football fan noticed. And it's not unfair to say that.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. And, they've got to make changes, whether those are staff changes or scheme changes or personnel changes. Something's got to give, because it hasn't been good enough in the biggest games. And if Ohio State wants to achieve, these lofty goals, I mean, hey, look, if you are consistently bringing in, if not the number 1 recruiting class in the country, certainly among the top few, you've got national championship expectations. That's what Ohio State thrives on. Beat Michigan, get to Indianapolis, win a Big Ten title, make the college football playoff, and compete for a national title. And going into the final game of the regular season, all of those goals, despite an early loss, all of those goals were very much in front of Ohio State. And then when they needed it to click, it didn't. And that was obviously pretty frustrating. And I think a lot of Ohio State fans, after watching last weekend's game, still aren't over it. I know I'm not. It was not good. It was embarrassing. It was really hard to watch. And it's got to get better if Ohio State's going to be relevant next year in the college football playoff discussion. Because we've talked, Brett, about how this team should be right there as the number 1 or number 2 team in the country next year. Think about the offensive talent they've got coming back. You might have a Heisman Trophy winner this year. You probably have one of the top 3 or 4 running backs in the country. I don't care that he was left off the Doak Walker list. You've probably got one of the top backs in the country. All 5 of Ohio State's offensive linemen this year were at least on the all-conference team, and a couple of them are probably going to be up for All-American candidates. You still got Jackson Smith and Jigba coming back next year. You've got Emeka Egbuka coming back next year. You've got Marvin Harrison Jr. back next year. You never know what surprise might come back, right? Last year, we all thought that, all right, Chris Olave and Thayer Munford, thanks, guys. Enjoyed watching you play in the Scarlet and Gray. Good luck in the NFL. And then, wait a second, what? They're coming back? It sort of came out of nowhere. You never know who might surprise us and return. So, I expect Ohio State to have the talent to be right there again next year, but it's insane to think they're going to be able to go out and do the exact same thing they did this year and get different results, and they've got to get a lot tougher in the offseason. I saw something, and we'll kind of wrap with this. I saw something, I don't know if it was necessarily calling out Mickey Marotti, but it was the concept that, Josh Gaddis, the offensive coordinator at Michigan, says, hey, Ohio State's a finesse team. They're not a tough team. I would imagine that probably doesn't sit very well with Coach Mick, who is widely regarded as one of the best in the business. He's an old school, tough guy, and he's gotten outstanding results for a very long time. I would imagine that, that weight room is going to look a little bit different this year with a slightly different edge and attitude toward it.
Yeah. I would guess that comment, along with the, some people who were born on third base think they hit a triple comment, will probably be mentioned somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 times, between now and next November. And the triple comment is kind of funny coming from Jim Harbaugh. But the idea about Ohio State not being a tough team, right? If you looked at the way that team was completely bullied around the Big House, a handful of days ago, I mean, I kind of think you're allowed to be able to say that. Now, it's not necessarily a program thing, but in that specific, body of work, if that's kind of what you're judging, and then your O-line goes out and basically pushes everyone around for 4 quarters. I mean, sure, right? The one thing that I think Ohio State can control in that specific regard is that they can, and Venice is kind of getting to exactly what I'm about to say, is Ohio State, when they were under Urban Meyer, lived and breathed and were obsessed with that Michigan game. That there are Urban used to put Michigan jerseys behind the entrance to the player entrance to the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. So players would literally walk over Michigan jerseys on their way into the building. That it's kind of a running joke, but that Urban Meyer loved that song, "It's Time for War." And I don't know who sings it. I kind of hate the song. And on a philosophical level, when you start equating football with actual war, you lose me really, really quick. But that song, and this is not hyperbole, folks, that song during Michigan week played 24 hours a day. He never turned it off. It was on the loudspeakers in that building all day, the entire week. And I think that philosophically, Ohio State and Ryan Day, and I'm not entirely sure this is necessarily Ryan's personality. I don't think he is necessarily the type of obsessive that Urban is and certainly was at Ohio State. But I think they can. You don't necessarily have to go like full Urban to be prepared for that game year in and year out. But if you start inching a little bit closer to that, I think that's the right place to be, because on the flip side of that, for the first time in a very long time, you saw Michigan do that in the offseason leading up. Almost every Michigan player in their post-game press conference after the game referenced that in some form or fashion. Harbaugh referenced it as well, that they became obsessed with it. So it's and I'm not entirely convinced that Ohio State maybe felt that quote unquote desperation or obsessiveness for winning the game this year that they have certainly in years past. So I think that's probably one thing that they can control and address messaging wise and motivation wise, really starting now all the way up until next November.
Oh, they certainly need to address it. That's got to be off-season priority number one. All right, we'll wrap with this. Just kind of going back to Freeman. I thought it was a pretty easy hire for Notre Dame. I know it's not official from the university's perspective yet. It sounds like it will be announced as early as tomorrow, as late as Friday. Tommy Rees is staying as the offensive coordinator. I would think that maybe some of the insanity that we were watching floated around yesterday about Notre Dame potentially being left out of the college football playoff because their head coach left. I thought that was stupid in the first place. And if that really is a consideration from the committee, shame on them. Truly, that's outrageous. But especially if Marcus Freeman and Tommy Rees are not bolting with Brian Kelly and they still have, their coordinators and the core of their staff together, all the more reason why that should just be an irrelevant thought and move on from that. It is what it is. If Notre Dame is worthy of a chance to make the college football playoff this year, it should not be held against them that their head coach decided to leave the program as quickly as he did. But as far as Marcus Freeman goes, I guess if I were going to place a bet on it, I'm a little surprised it wasn't Luke Fickell. I would have thought that maybe Fickell would be the guy, but I'm not surprised that Marcus Freeman has emerged in that conversation. I said it the other day. I thought it would be one of those two, maybe Urban Meyer, but the reality is that would have been a bit of a long shot. I think Freeman's going to probably do a great job, man. He's a heck of a recruiter. He's an extremely good dude. He's done an awesome job with their defense this year. And it seems like he's pretty well liked and respected in that building. So good for a former Buckeye, probably somewhat disappointing for current Ohio State fans that thought maybe there was a chance he would come back home. But again, I'm under the impression that was never really an option either.
If you've watched us consistently, you've heard me use this phrase when I talk about recruiting, and I use the phrase willingness to recruit, and the word willingness is purposeful on my part. The best recruiters in college football have an extreme desire or extremely driven to recruit, and it's one of the reasons why a guy like Al Washington continues to move up kind of the ladder, because that dude has an unbelievable willingness to recruit. Another guy that I would put kind of under that umbrella is Marcus Freeman. And you see what Notre Dame has done over the last handful of years, recruiting-wise, decade or whatever it's been, recruiting-wise, with maybe not the most willing recruiter in Brian Kelly. You put someone like Marcus Freeman in front of that program, and it's good things certainly are in the future that you're trending way upward in my mind. I don't know how much of an upgrade it is, X's and O's. I think there's a certain amount of knowledge that you just can't possibly have until you've been a head coach. But when it comes to the recruiting side, and certainly I think defensively, schematically, what Marcus has done the last handful of years speaks for itself. But recruiting wise, Notre Dame made an absolute home run, and they are in great hands right now.
Yeah, and the reality is they probably need to do some facilities upgrades, and maybe that'll be part of the commitment they make to Marcus. They're coming off of a tenure where Brian Kelly is now the winningest coach in the history of Notre Dame football, and he's one of only a handful of coaches that was there for 10 plus years. But they probably need to upgrade some of their facilities and some of their, some of the recruiting. I don't want to say tactics, but just the stuff that kids like nowadays. A
facility upgrade would go a long way.
A facility upgrade for sure, but just
call up Jimmy Dunn and ask for a check. Jimmy will write that in a heartbeat.
Yeah. Just some of the overall feel of Notre Dame at times gets a little bit aged. And the reality is, because they've got a national footprint, they're always going to be relevant. They can always recruit good kids because they're going to lean on their history more than any other program in America is going to lean on their history. And they should always be at a minimum in the conversation. But they've been in 2 of the last 3 college football playoffs, and they are very much on the doorstep of potentially qualifying again here this year.
Yeah, and that right there is what I'm talking about, right? That they have gotten to the playoff under Brian Kelly, and then have fallen on their face in that scenario both times, and fallen really remarkably short. If there's a guy to be able to get them over that hump and become exceptionally competitive in that moment, in those types of games against that type of opponent, it's probably Marcus Freeman.
Well, they definitely, to Buzz's comment here before we wrap up, that's, Notre Dame's schedule was certainly soft. They didn't play a great schedule this year. Now, that's not necessarily because they didn't schedule good teams that are typically good. Some of their opponents just didn't have great seasons, and that's just college football, man. You can only with some of these games you got to schedule so far out. You take your best chance, your best guess, and you hope that teams are going to be good when you see them. But there's no doubt if Notre Dame, if Ohio State played Notre Dame's schedule this year, the Buckeyes, I am pretty darn confident would be undefeated. I don't think there's anybody on that schedule that would have beaten Ohio State. So, anyways, Marcus Freeman, the new head coach, reportedly at Notre Dame, and we'll see how that impacts the Fighting Irish the rest of the year. But in the meantime, a former Buckeye is not available for Ohio State should they decide they're in the market for some help on the defensive side of the ball. For Brett Hiltbrand, I'm Brendan Gulick. Thanks for joining us tonight. As always, Buckeyes Now on SI, all of our social media handles. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. We love doing this kind of content, interacting with you. We do it basically on a daily basis and love having good conversation. If you subscribe to the channel and set your notifications, then you won't miss any of our live streams, and we'll have a chance to chat with you along the way. Check out everything you need to know about Ohio State football and basketball over on BuckeyesNow.com. A big win last night against number 1 ranked Duke Blue Devils, including some really cool pictures from that game. Had a couple of celebration videos as well, including watching everybody storm the floor and sing Carmen, Ohio together. It was really cool. So check that out over on BuckeyesNow.com, and we'll see you real soon.
We've got the whole crew together as we cover Ohio State with our instant analysis from Ohio State.
There's something that doesn't feel right.
Unbelievable effort from him today. Is E.J. Liddell going to crack the first team All Big Ten?
I think he can be the guy. I'm not trying to start a quarterback controversy.
He seems to have the durability. He certainly has the toughness. This is the question on a lot of people's minds here. Welcome to Buckeye Breakdown.